You might think that secretly killing a king and burying him under a palace floor would invite some kind of reckoning, maybe a popular rising or at least God's justice that eventually finds the man responsible. That is what the Derg, the Marxist officers who took power in Ethiopia in 1974, risked when they exactly did that to Haile Selassie in 1975, leaving him with no funeral and no marker. No such reckoning came. Ethiopian monarchy was one of the oldest in the world, going back to 3,000 years back in the past. Still, the throne was not restored, and the country did not rise against the man who had emptied it. What followed was quieter, and in the end, it cost Ethiopia far more than the people who killed him ever expected. The question I want to work through today is why. To see why, it helps to start with what a monarchy actually does, beyond sitting at the top of the government. A throne of this kind is not just mainly a job, it is a source of legitimacy, and legitimacy is what makes the people accept that a government has the right to govern them at all. You can hold power without it, of course, through force, but that kind of power without legitimacy is very costly and unstable. A monarchy of long standing does not rise and fall with the next election or with whichever faction happens to be ahead this particular year. It rests on continuity and on the sense that the order has always been there and carries its own authority. Think of it as an trusted old court of law. People accept its rulings, and not because they voted for the judge sitting that day. They accept them because the institution itself is recognized, and that recognition was built over a very, very long time. A long-standing monarchy works on something like the same basis. The authority sits in the institution more than in one person, which is why it can survive a weak ruler and why it is so hard to rebuild once it is gone. Ethiopia's monarchy had this in its unusual strong form. By tradition, the ruling line, the Solomonic Dynasty, traced itself back to Menelik, described as the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. The Kebra Nagast presents that lineage as the foundation of Ethiopian identity and royal authority, and many Ethiopians have held that the Ark of the Covenant rests under the permanent guard in Aksum. Whether you read that as literal history or as a national tradition, it did a real political job. It gave a country made of many peoples a shared story that crossed regional and ethnic lines, which is exactly what such a state needs in order to hold it together. There was a second source of strength as well. While most of Africa was colonized, Ethiopia was not, and it stayed independent. And the monarchy became the symbol of that independence. Church and crown were closely tied, with emperors ruling under religious authority and protecting the institutions that reinforced it. So who was the man at center of this? Haile Selassie was born in 1892 as Tafari Makonnen, into a period of consolidation after Menelik II had restored central authority. His father, Ras Makonnen, was a senior imperial figure and an able military commander. 4 years after Tafari was born, Menelik's forces beat Italy at the Battle of Adwa, a victory that secured Ethiopia's independence and carried weight far beyond its borders. So Tafari grew up inside a monarchy, unique monarchy, that had just shown it could hold off a European empire. His own rise was gradual, built on education and alliances rather than open confrontation. In 1911, he married Menen Asfaw, which strengthened his standing among the elite. When Liege Ieyasu lost the support of the Christian nobility, Tafari backed a move to replace him. Empress Zewditu took the throne, and he became regent. On the 2nd of November of 1930, he was crowned emperor and took the name Haile Selassie. His moment on the world stage came in 1935, and it came through a defeat. Italy invaded. Mussolini wanted to reverse the humiliation of Adwa, and the clash at Val gave him his pretext. Selassie appealed to the League of Nations, but the sanctioning did nothing. The full Italian assault began on the 3rd of October of 1935 with air power and chemical weapons used against forces that had no way to answer them. Selassie joined his troops in the field, including at the Battle of Maychov. After the defeat, he went to Geneva and addressed the League of Nations directly. He put the case as a test of whether international rules meant anything once a strong state decides to break them. The speech traveled widely, and it made him a figure associated with African sovereignty and resistance to colonial rule. In 1941, with British help, he returned home and re-entered Addis Ababa on the 5th of May, 5 years after he had left it. From there, he positioned Ethiopia as a fixed point during the years when colonial empires were breaking up and much of the continent was unstable. In 1963, he hosted African leaders in Addis Ababa and played a central part in founding the Organization of African Unity. For newly independent states looking for a model of African sovereignty, Ethiopia under Selassie carried a real weight. What was going wrong at home while the reputation grew abroad? Land ownership stayed concentrated in a few hands. Rural life was hard for most people, and public service lagged behind a growing population. Selassie did bring reforms, including a revised constitution in 1945 that widened parliament, but real executive power stayed firmly with him. Students and younger military officers began to question both how power was held and how slowly it was being reformed. In 1973, drought and famine struck Wollo, and the government's response was widely seen as inadequate. Trust collapsed as protests spread and the military began to split. In 1974, junior officers formed the Derg and took power. That September, Selassie was arrested with no transparent legal process. The following year, the Derg announced that he had died of natural causes. Later investigations described the killing carried out while he was in custody. What did his removal actually change? There are broadly two ways to read what followed. The first is that the fall of the monarchy was painful. The second, and the one I find more convincing, is that the Derg removed something it did not understand and could not replace, and that the country had been paying for it ever since. The Derg imposed the Marxist system, nationalized the land, restricted private ownership, and stripped imperial symbols out of public life. Selassie's name was removed from education and from public memory. And like in many communist countries, then came the Red Terror, with mass arrests and executions, and families were at times made to pay for the bullets used to kill their own relatives. The economy fell apart and foreign support drained, and the country entered a long stretch of instability. The Derg itself finally fell in 1991. Selassie's remains were eventually recovered, and in 2000 he was given a state funeral that drew large crowds. What we can say with confidence is that those crowds came. Among older Ethiopians and across diaspora, the monarchy still stands as a national identity and a continuity that the governments after it have not been able to reproduce. Ethiopia became a federal republic, and the imperial house continues in exile under Crown Prince Zera Yacob Amcha Selassie, who keeps a low profile and has said he would serve if the people called for him. Before I finish, a quick word on how this channel works. This is a monarchist channel, and it makes that case openly. The argument here is that monarchy has been a serious source of stability and legitimacy, and that its loss has often cost more than people expected. If you think this perspective is worth defending, the simplest way to help is to subscribe, so argument reaches more people who are open to it. And if you want to back it directly, YouTube membership and the Patreon community are both open. Whichever way you choose to help, it counts and it helps this thing going. Why did removing one man cost Ethiopia so much? Because Haile Selassie carried more than the office of ruler. He was the visible point of a legitimacy framework that had held a diverse country together for a very long time. And when Derg buried him, it was trying to bury that framework together with him. The mistake was in assuming the framework could simply be removed and the country would carry on as before. Marxism that replaced it could govern through force, of course, but it could not make people accept that order as their own, and the gap that opened has never been fully closed. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.